McKinsey and Amazon Web Services are forming an alliance focused on enterprise AI. That can't be good. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Dave is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI SME, an AI skeptic, looking at AI with a balanced perspective. Let's get started. So there's been a recent launch of what they're calling Amazon McKinsey Group, AMG. And they make sure it's that you know it's an alliance, not a partnership. I'm not sure what the difference makes, but that they're asserting that. And I have a link in the description to the article I'm putting up on the screen now, so you can check it out yourself. I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. And they're going to highlight a growing trend as AI adoption in enterprise remains sluggish. Cloud providers and consulting firms are forming alliances designed less to deliver impartial solutions and more to lock in clients in their respective ecosystem. So what's occurring now is you're not seeing the uptake in AI as much as I think that the professional service companies thought they would see, and definitely what the AI providers thought they would see, including AWS and also Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, things like that. So they're resorting to these marketing gimmicks, or sales gimmicks at least. That's what I kind of view this as. And you can look at it in detail and judge it for yourself. But at the end of the day, they're putting rigorous processes and, what they consider net new ideas around the adoption of AI for many of the enterprises. And they're selling this as a fundamental solution to get enterprises transferred over into leveraging AI for maximum efficiency, I guess, at the end of the day. So they're doing what everybody else is doing. And we covered the playbooks here, and I covered playbooks on my other channel. I'll go ahead and put the link to that video, where AI playbooks basically are, created by the consulting organizations as, kind of marketing gimmicks to push companies into AI, specifically agentic AI. This is very similar to that. This looks like it's something that's a bit more involved than just a paper that someone's going to publish. But you should be wary of this nonetheless. And so let's talk about the aspects of this and typically why you should avoid this. So while AMG promises seamless transformation and value at scale, decision makers must recognize that such partnerships are driven by commercial interest, not objective guidance. Beneath the veneer of integration and innovation lies the inherent conflict of interest where both AWS and McKinsey stand to gain, not necessarily the clients. So, here's the core thing I'm asserting here is that these are conflicted parties. In other words, Amazon is trying to sell AI services on their network. And so that's why they're creating this alliance. And I think they would admit that if you talk to them about it. And obviously McKinsey is trying to get professional service contracts around this. And so they view this, if we come up with some new ideas, maybe we can get enterprises to start to adopt AI in a much more faster way than they currently are. And what's happening now in the enterprise space is they're not moving as fast as I think that many of the AI businesses, including professional services and cloud service providers, thought they would. And we predicted that here on this channel. I talked about that 3 or 4 years ago. They're going to move at their own pace and, in essence, spend the money at their own pace as well. The big thing with AI adoption, it's very expensive. There aren't huge piles of billions of dollars that are sitting within these companies. And the cloud providers and the professional service providers are coming to them and say, let's start hitting the accelerator on use of AI. There's just no resources to do it for the most part, unless you take away resources from operating the business, which is going to be dangerous. So they have a ship, that's sailing, and they're asking them to approve it. But I think in many cases, they don't have the talent. They don't have the appetite for risk. And the big one is they don't have the money. And so in other words, their data is not in good shape. They would have to reinvent, much of their infrastructure around leveraging AI, to, some sort of a functional value that they're going to have. Not saying they're not going to do it, but they're not going to do it at the speed everybody thought they're going to do it. And so you're seeing all of these marketing gimmicks that are coming from everywhere right now, where it's almost silly, because I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in adoption. And I think in many cases, these are going to be dangerous for people who do fall for this, because there's some proprietary downsides, lock-in, lots of deficits that you're going to find overpaying for the AI systems. We'll talk about that specifically. So Amazon Web Services' primary goal with AMG is to drive more enterprises onto their cloud, regardless, whether it's a best fit or not. And that's kind of the core concern for me. You got to remember, I'm an AI architect. I teach AI architecture, and I have lots of videos on LinkedIn and other places that talks about how to pick AI systems and how to certainly build AI systems in the cloud and not on the cloud. You have to have an objective outlook as to what the potential solutions are going to be. It's almost never going to be one particular brand, one particular provider. And so in other words, everything's not going to lead you always to AWS or lead you to Microsoft or lead you to Google or lead you to on-prem, kinds of systems. And picking the best of breed services for AI, in other words, the minimum viable service is able to provide the maximum amount of value. That's typically going to be a mix of heterogeneous systems. It's not going to be a single brand. And so when they're pushing you to a single brand solution, that more likely than not means they're pushing you to less efficiency. And so in many cases, when I find people that said, well, we have a pure Microsoft, deployment or a pure Google deployment or a pure AWS deployment, when I audit those architectures, I figured out that they're spending 5, sometimes, 7 times the amount of money that they should be spending. And that's because they don't have efficiency in the architecture. There's no value in the architecture because they didn't really seek value. They just seek to push their services onto a single platform and force fitting that in many instances. And so while some services on AWS may be a fit, it's definitely not going to be all services for the most part. I'm sure there are odd architectures out there where it makes sense for all of the systems to go on AWS, but typically that's going to be an outlier. And so what they're doing here is in essence pushing you to that. And so regardless of the cool intellectual stuff that they have, and I'm sure it's very compelling, but the in-state architecture that you're going to find is something that's not going to be efficient for you. And that's my core issue here. We did the same thing with cloud, 15 years ago. Everybody started moving to AWS or Microsoft or Google. And then we had these monolithic solutions. And then people 10 years later are complaining of the fact that they're spending 3 times, 4 times the amount of money they should be spending on the cloud service than they thought they were when they picked those services 10, 15 years ago. This is going to be no different. So if you trust a vendor, they're going to lead you to their stuff. They're not going to lead you to their competitor stuff. And their stuff may not be right for you. That's what I'm asserting here. So McKinsey is a bit of a concern as well. So their role shifts from a neutral advisor to strategic partner with financial stake in a specific vendor's success. And so this is my problem with not only this alliance, but a lot of these partnerships you see with these lot of big professional services firms. They have partners who represent a particular technology inside the firms where they're incentivized to sell that technology. And so if they get embedded into a project, they're going to push that technology because that's to their own personal gain. They're meeting their numbers, selling more AWS, more Microsoft, more Google, all that kind of stuff. And so you need to be wary of the fact that in many cases, these guys are, selling themselves as objective, trusted advisors, but they're not. They're in essence, kind of a third-party outside sales force for many of these AI vendors out there. And they're not looking out for you. They're looking out for the bottom line, their ability to meet their numbers by selling more of this technology. And so that's a conflict of interest. I find it all the time. People are surprised that I push back on it. And, sometimes say, well, you're being naive, Dave. That's the way the world works. It doesn't have to work that way. You can get to your most optimized solution where you're paying the least amount of money and getting the most amount of value that comes back to the business. And right now, people aren't focused on that. They're just focused on moving after a shiny object, which is, generative AI and agentic AI, and be damned the optimization of the systems. And so they're going to end up overpaying for these things. So the operational cost of these things is going to be 10 times what they should be. And so that's money you could spend on other areas of the business, hire people, train people, have a better Christmas party, do something else that's going to have value. Instead, the money goes directly to the cloud providers, the money goes directly to the big consulting firms, and the enterprises get screwed in terms of their missing value propositions that they should have. So this alliance is a symptom of how slow uptake of AI in the enterprise is occurring. Both sides are desperate for growth and resorting to flashy alliances. You notice AWS just laid a bunch of people off, I think 30,000 over the last 6-7 months. Microsoft did the same thing a while ago. And we're seeing weaknesses in the market. We're seeing weaknesses in the growth of cloud, and we're seeing weaknesses in the uptake on AI. So AI is not growing as fast as they thought it would. It's growing, And it's certainly growing exponentially, but they thought it would be growing exponentially times 3. And so everybody's sitting around waiting for something to happen. In many of the cases, the vendors and the cloud providers and the consulting companies that are reaching out to me, my clients, they're asking, where's the market? And the reality is I told them the market's going to grow at its own time, and they're not necessarily funded at the rates that they think they're going to be funded. You got to remember that you can spend, and what they're doing now, they're spending, trillions of dollars on building out AI infrastructure, building data centers, things like that. And they're concerned that they're not going to have a demand for those data center assets when they come online. And that's probably true. I think the reality is that many of the AI companies out there, including the cloud computing platforms, are overbuilding. In other words, they're not having a good understanding of where everything's going. I don't necessarily think it's going to be as GPU saturated as everybody thinks. It's going to be a multitude of different processors. And we may end up with, many data centers that we didn't need, which is a shame because, the very expensive, big, ugly buildings, they don't employ anybody. They eat a lot of power. So don't mistake a slick marketing collaboration for innovation. It's about selling, not solving. This is a sales gimmick. Far and wide. And by the way, feel free, McKinsey folks, you want to call me out in the comments on this, make your argument. They almost never do, by the way. I've never seen anybody push back on any of this, which is a little telling, because that's what it is. So you have to identify it as, so if I'm talking to my client, we're sitting across from Amazon and McKinsey, and they're selling this, that's how I would describe it to them. This is a sales pitch at the end of the day. They're not looking out for your value. They're looking out for their bottom line, disguised as something that's pretty slick marketing, which it is, pretty slick marketing. And by the way, I've done these things in my career. I've worked for many professional service companies and, done these little projects where you keep, collaborations and things like that. And they're trying to get inroad to create demand for the consulting services and create demand for, somebody else's technology. However, the key focus should be on delivering value to your clients. And I know that's, sounds naive and old school, but that's where I'm coming from. And value to your clients means you take an objective look at all technology, not just a single vendor. And you also learn not to work with consulting organizations that are selling somebody else's technology. They're not looking out for you, they're looking out for themselves. So businesses should be wary of these arrangements and don't fall for one-size-fits-all solutions wrapped in a silver bullet. Now, I assume if I was talking to McKinsey or AWS, they're going to say, we're going to recommend whatever technology is going to rewrite for the clients. I get it. And, normally that's the way it's going to be spun. However, it ends up not being that way. In fact, if you look at this, if people are going to buy this, in the next 2-3 years, and you audit those projects, and by the way, I'm available to audit projects, you'll find out that they almost exclusively went to AWS because that's what they were geared up to do. Even if they, thought they were being objective, they're not going to be objective because they're going to sell what they know. And that's the way, this whole world works. Unfortunately, the result of that, as we saw with many of these cloud computing deployments, you end up with something that's way more inefficient than it should be. It's going to work, by the way. People are, that's not the metric here. We can make something work, but it's going to be 10 times the cost. That doesn't mean it's a win. Well, anyway, let me know what you think of the comments about this, whether you think I'm naive and should kind of get with the flow, or if this is something you're concerned about, and if you agree with me or disagree with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, you guys stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.